The beginning of a memorable Christmas. The living room of a house decorated with Christmas spirit. The Christmas tree stands tall in the corner of the room, shining brightly with colorful twinkling lights, reflecting the shimmering light on the glass window. The balls, tinsel, and pretty golden bells hanging in the air create a cozy, intimate space. The scent of the newly cut pine tree wafts throughout the room, blending with the gentle scents of spices from the Christmas candies baking in the oven. The narrator, a young man, sits on the sofa with a glass of red wine in his hand, smiling as he looks at the carefully wrapped gifts under the tree. He seems to be enjoying this peaceful moment. His face is radiant. The light from the pine tree shines on his face, creating shimmering reflections like a magical painting. His voice rings out, gentle and full of emotion. Christmas 2018, my girlfriend Grace and I decided to spend the holiday at her parents' house. I had never met them before, so it was inevitable that I felt both excited and nervous. But I love Christmas, and the warmth of this holiday made me more eager than ever. Everything felt so special in this space. I remember standing at the door, suitcase in hand, looking at the warm yellow lights shining from inside, feeling like I had stepped into another world. Everything in the house was perfect, from the string lights on the windows to the Christmas stockings hanging on the fireplace, all creating a perfect picture of a Christmas night. And I was just an outsider, not knowing what it would be like to meet my lover's family for the first time. He paused for a moment, his eyes flashing with worry, as if recalling the emotions of those days. Grace was different. She was so confident. She had told me about her family many times, from her mother, a lovely woman with a smile on her face, to her father, who she said was strict but fair. I worried about whether I would be able to make a good impression on them, whether I would be as interesting and welcoming as Grace said I would be. But then, all those worries disappeared when Grace's mother opened the door to welcome us. Her warm hug seemed to dispel all the tension in me. His voice became softer, as if sharing a sweet memory. We sat around the dinner table that night. It was a wonderful Christmas meal, with fragrant roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a large pudding placed right in the middle of the table. Everyone was laughing, telling stories, and I felt like I belonged there. It was an unforgettable moment. He smiled at the memory and continued. That night, when everyone had dispersed and it was just Grace and I felt a closeness, a connection that cannot be put into words. Looking at her in the Christmas lights, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. This Christmas was not just a holiday, it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, where I was no longer an outsider, but a part of this family. He took a deep breath, his eyes returning to the lights on the Christmas tree, and then looked straight at the listener, as if to share that happiness. And so, that Christmas opened a new door for me, a door to beautiful memories, moments that I will never forget. A Christmas to remember, not just because of the gifts or the meals, but because I found a family, a place where I truly felt like I belonged. First meeting with my girlfriend's family. Grace's family's house was filled with the Christmas atmosphere. Everything was meticulously prepared, from the flickering candles on the dining table to the small pine trees in the corners of the room, all blending together to create a warm and loving space. Artificial snowflakes gently fell on the windows, reflecting the lights from inside the house, and the cheerful laughter rang out from everyone. When Grace and I entered, I immediately felt the warmth and friendliness of her family. Grace's mother stood at the door, welcoming us with a wide smile, her eyes as warm as a ray of winter sunshine. She hugged Grace before turning to me, holding out her hand and saying, "Hello, welcome to our home. We're going to have a wonderful evening." Her voice was gentle but full of enthusiasm. I felt a little confused, but also relieved to realize that I wasn't facing the coldness or distance I had imagined. Grace smiled, her face shining with joy as her mother treated me as if I were already part of the family. The Christmas table was neatly set, with a bright red tablecloth and bright white china plates. The centerpiece of the table was a golden roast turkey, emitting a delicious aroma that made me instantly crave it. Surrounding it were the typical holiday dishes, from fluffy mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, to sweet Christmas pudding, all perfectly arranged. After everyone sat down, I felt a little nervous about starting a conversation with Grace's parents. Her father, John, was a burly man with graying hair and sharp eyes. However, he had a rather open appearance, not at all pressuring as I expected. He started chatting with me right away, asking about my work and hobbies, and I quickly realized that we had a lot in common. "So you like basketball too?" he asked, his eyes lighting up when I told him about the games I used to watch. "I'm a big Lakers fan, and although I don't watch much basketball these days, I still like to play on the weekends." "Do you play?" I was relieved to find that he wasn't the serious type. We talked about famous basketball games, favorite players, and even memorable moments from playing. I also shared my love of hunting, and John immediately expressed his excitement. "You hunt? That's great. Grace and I go hunting in the winter. It's one of our family hobbies. If you want, we can go hunting together this holiday." I smiled, feeling that I was starting to connect with her family. The atmosphere around me suddenly became more pleasant. Everyone seemed friendly and open, and I told myself that maybe this meeting wouldn't be as bad as I thought. Grace sat next to me, smiling happily as I started talking to her father. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pride, as if to say that I had been accepted by her family. I felt a little proud of myself, and also a little nervous when I thought about the stories Grace had told me about her family. Everything was going so smoothly, and I was starting to feel like I was really a part of this family. However, just when I thought everything was perfect, that peace was suddenly broken. While everyone was chatting happily, Mr. John suddenly asked me a question that surprised me a bit. "What do you think about marrying Grace?" This question was such a shock that I stopped, not knowing how to answer. I turned to Grace, her eyes sparkling and slightly red. Although I knew she was looking forward to my answer, I couldn't help but feel nervous at the suddenness of this question. I looked into Mr. John's eyes, feeling the seriousness in his gaze. "We're enjoying this moment," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I love Grace and I cherish her family, but we still have a lot of time to get to know each other." Immediately, the atmosphere in the room changed a bit. Although Mr. John didn't say anything more, I felt everyone's attention was on me. Expectant gazes, forced smiles, all of which created a very uncomfortable feeling. Everything was fine, but there was an indescribable feeling, as if the original perfection had begun to crack. A sudden snowstorm. Outside the window, the scenery gradually became covered in white snow. The cold wind blew strongly from outside, causing the snow to fall heavily, covering the road and forming a white blanket. The snowflakes gently drifted in the air, but they became heavier and heavier, as if they were determined to cover everything. The trees in the yard, which were originally lush and green, now became bare, the branches bending under the weight of the snow. The scene was strangely quiet, but not in a peaceful way, but a cold, oppressive silence. I stood by the window, observing the space outside, while everyone in the house continued to chat happily. The laughter, the sound of chopsticks hitting dishes, the family stories filled with laughter could not dispel the uneasiness in my heart. At this moment, I just wanted to go out, wanted to continue my plans. But the snow had changed everything. The roads had been bad since we had dinner, but now they were completely impassable. The cars in the yard were already buried under a thick layer of snow, and no one was sure if they would be able to get out of here tomorrow morning. I turned around and looked at Grace's family, chatting happily. They didn't seem worried. On the contrary, they were enjoying the snow and were talking about fun plans for the next day. Meanwhile, I just wanted everything to be over quickly. Wanted this feeling of confusion and anxiety to go away. I couldn't stop thinking about what I would do in this situation. I wasn't ready to stay overnight in a house I wasn't familiar with. I was also worried about what would happen if the snowstorm lasted longer. Would we be able to get out tomorrow? Would the roads be back to normal? Grace walked up to me, her eyes shining with excitement. She pulled me away from the window, where I was still standing, staring out at the sky like a dream. She smiled, looking cheerful as if this were a wonderful thing, not a terrifying snowstorm. "I've always loved Christmas in the snow, you know," Grace said, her voice filled with excitement. "This is the first time you and I will stay overnight in the air like this. Isn't it really wonderful?" I forced a smile, nodding but not feeling as happy as she did. I looked at her, feeling trapped in a situation I couldn't control. Actually, I wanted to go out to escape this feeling, but I couldn't say it. I smiled and listened to her, trying to blend into the happy atmosphere of everyone. Grace's parents seemed very comfortable too. They started preparing the beds in the living room, saying that they would make this evening as comfortable as possible together. I could see they weren't worried about the snow, which made me feel even more strange. For me, snow wasn't part of the Christmas fun. It was just an unexpected interruption to my plans. I couldn't help but think about what I'd missed, what I could have done if I hadn't been here. Everyone was pulling pillows from their bedrooms, bringing them outside to make a big bed in the middle of the living room. A family-style dinner with Christmas movies was playing on the big screen in the corner. Grace and her mother were making some hot chocolate for everyone to enjoy. The atmosphere was getting warmer than ever. They were discussing plans for tomorrow, whether they could go out and play in the snow, while I was still feeling lost in all the fun. The snow outside was falling harder and harder, and the room was starting to fill with the scent of hot chocolate and Christmas candy. Everyone, from grandparents to siblings, were happy, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my heart. Everything was happening in a warm shell, but inside I felt suffocated. I wasn't a person who liked surprises, and I wasn't a person who could comfortably live in an uncontrollable situation. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, but I knew now was not the time to complain. Grace looked at me with gentle eyes. She didn't notice my discomfort, or maybe she was just trying to cheer me up. I couldn't do anything but sigh silently, hoping that the snowstorm would pass quickly, so I could return to my normal life. "Don't worry, everything will be fine," Grace said, holding my hand firmly, but I couldn't completely believe her words. No matter what she said, I couldn't help but feel like I was stuck in a situation I had no control over. Strange sounds in the night. The room was so quiet that I could hear Grace's breathing, the soft breathing of her as she fell into a deep sleep. It was a quiet Christmas night, with only the dim light of the nightlight illuminating the walls of the room. Everything seemed to be sleeping with us, but inside me, a sense of unease began to rise. I lay still, trying to enjoy the peaceful moment, but it seemed that it was not easy. I turned my head to look at the window, where the snow continued to fall, creating a thin white crust on the ground. Everything outside was still quiet, but something was wrong. Suddenly I heard a soft but distinct sound, as if something was dragging on the hard ground outside the window. This sound was not the sound of wind, nor the sound of falling snow. It was the sound of branches rubbing against each other, but it came at a regular, lingering frequency, like something was deliberately moving. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was just the snow falling, or the strong wind blowing through the branches outside, making them rub against each other. But the sound didn't stop. It lasted longer than I thought. The strange feeling kept rising inside me, making me more and more uneasy. I turned my head, looked at Grace, who was still sleeping soundly, unaware of the unease that was gnawing at me. My eyes were fixed on her, trying to regain my composure. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more distinct the strange sound outside the window became. The sound of dragging branches echoed louder and louder, as if someone was walking around the yard, dragging something heavy. In the darkness, I couldn't see anything but the dim night, but the sound seemed to be getting closer, clearer, around this house. I tried to reassure myself that it was probably just the wind blowing through the branches around the house. The snow was falling heavily, and strong winds could always make such strange sounds. But when I touched Grace's hand, felt her warmth, her peace, it couldn't dispel the cold and anxious feeling that was invading me. The feeling of unease inside me couldn't be controlled anymore. I slowly sat up, gently pulling my hand away from Grace without waking her. The light from the nightlight was still dim, just enough to illuminate a small part of the room. I listened, each gust of wind blowing through the window. The noise outside became clearer, as if someone, was wandering around the house. I stood up, walked lightly towards the window, trying not to make a sound. It was dark outside. Nothing was clear except the snow and the swaying branches. But the dragging sound continued, like a strange sign that I couldn't explain. Part of me told me there was nothing to worry about, that it was just the wind or the snow on the branches. But the other part of me, the part that sensed something was different, couldn't rest easy. The noise didn't stop, but it got louder and louder, to the point where I felt like someone was deliberately making it, like they were trying to get my attention. I cautiously approached the window, just wanting to make sure everything was okay. I opened the window a little, feeling the cold air from outside, the smell of snow, the smell of wet earth, but nothing but silence. I looked out, seeing only endless darkness. Nothing strange. No one. The branches outside were still swaying in the wind, but there was no sign of anything else. Maybe I was just too nervous, I told myself. It must be the wind. But the uneasiness still wouldn't let me go. Looking back at Grace, who was sleeping soundly, I felt a little relieved. I wanted to go back to bed, lie down next to her and continue sleeping. But the strange feeling refused to let go. I decided to close the window, sit down by the bed and look out again, trying to convince myself that everything was okay. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the vague fear, the indescribable unease. Gradually, that sound seemed to quieten down. Or maybe it was because I had gotten used to it, but I still couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Something was still lurking in the darkness out there. At that moment, I just wished that the night would pass quickly, that the morning light could bring peace, so that I wouldn't have to face those strange sounds anymore. The mysterious shadow. The room was quiet, except for the steady ticking of the clock on the bedside table. The dim lights of the house seemed to want to give way to the darkness, but even so, there was something wrong. A feeling of oppression, of heaviness, that made it impossible for me to sleep. I lay there, eyes half open, looking out the window where the moonlight drew long shadows on the ground. Everything around me was as usual, quiet and familiar. But then, suddenly, I saw something in the backyard, making my heart stop. It was a shadow. His silhouette stood straight, in the darkness, seemingly blending into the silent space of the garden. But I knew clearly, he was not a part of that darkness. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his presence was too obvious, as if he were standing right in front of me, even though he was a large yard away. I sat up in the dark, my body cold. My first feeling was confusion, but then a deep fear came over me, as if it was not just him standing there but something else hidden behind the dim light of the night. My heart was pounding. I couldn't tell if it was because of the cold of the night or because of the rising fear. The cold feeling in my body made me shiver. I tried to call out to Grace, my best friend who was sleeping soundly next to me, but I couldn't. She was sleeping so soundly, as if she didn't know that there was a strange figure standing outside, motionless, just staring at the house. I wanted to wake her up, but the more I tried, the more helpless I felt, as if the entire space in this room was closing in, not allowing me to do anything. The figure still stood there, not moving, just silent, as if waiting for something. It felt like he knew I was watching, like I was the only target in a game I didn't know about. My throat was dry, unable to speak. I wanted to turn off the light, close the window, but my limbs were paralyzed, unable to move. Time seemed to drag on endlessly. With each passing second, I felt his presence more clearly. The shadow's gaze penetrated through the window, as if he were reading my thoughts. I didn't dare close my eyes, nor did I dare look away. Only the faint light of the night lamp and the silence of the night were the only things I could feel in this space. Then I saw he started to move. One step, then two. Slowly, but with determination. Each step he took seemed to bring a cold wind through the room, chilling me from head to toe. He didn't look anywhere but the house. I couldn't say anything. I could only sit there, motionless, my eyes still fixed on that figure. My heart beat faster and faster. Everything around me suddenly became blurry. I didn't know if I was still awake or if it was all just a scary dream that I couldn't wake up from. Only he, that figure, was still standing there, a mysterious figure in the dark night. The next morning when I woke up, the backyard was covered in snow, creating a cold and gloomy scene. Everything seemed frozen. Not even a sound could be heard through the thick layer of snow. The scene was quiet, as if waiting for something to happen, and I felt an inexplicable tension in the air. Someone's footsteps, the traces of a stranger, were imprinted on the fresh snow, clear and haunting. For some reason, I felt a strange pull pulling me to follow those footprints. They led me to the backyard, where there was no one but me, and the darkness was all around. I followed each trace carefully, my heart pounding in my chest, as if each step I took was a decision of no return. Just yesterday, I was still trembling when I saw the shadow of a person standing outside the yard, but now I couldn't help but follow those strange footprints. Footprints were clearly imprinted on the snow, like clues leading me to the warehouse. At first I thought I was just imagining things, that maybe they were just random traces, but as I got closer to the warehouse, I began to feel a presence, as if someone was watching me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but fear still rose in my heart. Although my body was tired, my feet kept moving, unable to stop, unable to turn back. The warehouse stood silently in the quiet space, the windows covered in snow, and the shadows lurking inside. I couldn't see clearly through the window, but I knew that something was wrong. I approached the warehouse door, my palms sweating despite the cold. The door wasn't closed tightly, but just strangely closed, as if someone had just left, or had been waiting inside. Strange sounds rang out from inside. A metallic scraping sound, lingering in the air, made me slightly startled. This strange feeling made me unable to leave, but also not brave enough to enter. My heart pounded as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. I paused for a moment, breathing evenly to calm myself, but I couldn't. Everything became blurry, as if I was in a dream, unable to distinguish between reality and illusion. The footprints led me to this place, but did I have enough strength to face what was waiting inside the warehouse? Not knowing where to get the courage, I walked closer to the door. I cautiously raised my hand, gently pushing the door open a little. A slight creak sounded as the door moved, and in that moment I glanced through the crack. A cold feeling ran down my spine. My heart almost stopped beating. Inside the warehouse, a figure stood still, only the steady sound of metal rubbing. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I recognized something very familiar in that figure. The figure didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there as if waiting for me. My mind was spinning, unable to understand what was happening. It felt like I was trapped in a trap that I had set for myself. I couldn't look any further, couldn't stand there for another second. A small voice in my heart urged me to do something, but my legs were frozen, unable to move. Then I pulled my hand away from the door, but my eyes were still drawn to the strange figure in the warehouse, and I felt as if there was an invisible force pulling me closer, making me unable to pull away. Facing danger. Just a moment more, I knew I couldn't stand there any longer. The figure in the warehouse remained still, as if he hadn't noticed my presence beyond the cracked door. But I could feel the tension rising by the second, the air thick and full of fear, as if something would break it at any moment. And then I realized he started to move. A strange sound rang out as he stepped toward me. The sledgehammer in his hand made a heavy metallic sound, like a warning. My heart pounded, each beat threatening to burst. I felt an indescribable panic, as if my own body was betraying my will. Every step he took was a strong beat in my chest. My legs suddenly felt heavy, as if some invisible force was holding me back. He didn't say anything, not a sound other than his footsteps and the sound of his hammers scraping against each other. His face was still in shadow, but the dim light from the door let me see his eyes, cold and emotionless, as if he weren't human. His eyes never left me, and the look made me feel like I was tied to something, unable to escape. As he got a little closer, I couldn't control myself anymore. Every nerve in my body was taut like a bowstring, and there was only one thought in my head: run. I didn't know why, but I knew that if I didn't run now, I wouldn't have a chance. He was too close. My mind was blank, only fear, and the strong urge to leave this place. I let out a scream, the sound echoing in the quiet space of the warehouse, but it wasn't strong enough to make me stop. Immediately, I turned around and ran towards the door. At this moment, my legs felt like they had no strength left, but I still had to run, had to escape that dark shadow. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. Every step I took seemed to be delayed, as if the air around me was trying to hold me back. I rushed through the warehouse door without hesitation, only knowing that I had to go out, had to find safety. But as I ran into the yard, I felt a cold wind blowing, making me shiver. I didn't dare to look back, but I could still feel his presence behind me, like an inevitable ghost. My heart was pounding, not because of fatigue, but because of extreme fear. I ran faster, not daring to stop, not daring to turn back to see if he was chasing me. Every breath I took felt like it was cut off. It felt like the air was slowly disappearing, not enough for me to inhale. I didn't dare to look around, didn't dare to stop, but every step I took seemed to carry with it all my life, all my hope, a fragile hope that I would escape that dark hand. Although I couldn't hear any footsteps behind me, I couldn't stop. I couldn't let myself be caught. That was all I could think of at that moment. My body, filled with fear and fatigue, kept running, kept rushing in the darkness, even though everything around me became blurry and hazy. Security camera replay. The living room was no longer as warm as usual. Instead, the atmosphere was heavy, as if something gloomy was hanging over everyone. Grace's family gathered around the TV screen, the light from the screen shining on their worried faces, while the security camera footage played back. A blurry image of the backyard appeared, a figure standing silently in the dark. Only a dark shadow stretched out on the white snow. There was no sound, No sign of what the person was doing other than standing there, staring at the house. We watched the video over and over again, but no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't make out any clear details. The person's face was invisible. His eyes, smile, or any other identifying features were obscured by the darkness, leaving only a vague shape and the faint light from the surrounding houses. It was like a missing piece of a puzzle that we couldn't solve, something broken that couldn't be completed. I tried to focus on the image on the screen, looking for any sign that could explain the situation, but everything was still just a blur. While I still couldn't calm down, what was strange was Grace's family's reaction. They didn't seem panicked or worried like I had expected. Instead, they seemed quite calm, even somewhat unconcerned. Grace's parents sat there, their eyes still calm, not showing any fear. They looked at the video as if this was just a normal thing, as if mysterious figures at night were a part of life that they were familiar with. Grace's father even chuckled, saying, "It must have been someone passing by. Maybe a prank by the kids." Grace's mother also nodded in agreement, seeming not to care much. "Maybe someone is trying to be mischievous. There's nothing to worry about." I looked at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. Neither of them seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. How could they be so calm when that figure was clearly a potential danger? Did they really understand how terrifying this scene was? Grace sat beside me, her expression not changing much. She looked at the screen silently, as if everything was fine. I felt like I was being left behind, alone in the fear that was rising in my heart. While I couldn't stop thinking about what happened last night, about that mysterious figure, Grace's family seemed completely unconcerned. The feeling of being left alone in confusion made me unable to control myself anymore. I turned to Grace, my voice trembling. "Don't you find this strange? That person, he's not like anyone else. It's not a joke." Grace looked at me strangely, as if she didn't understand why I was so worried. "It's just someone who got lost. It's not the first time. People have been around here before." Her words only made me feel more confused. How could someone dare to hang around so late at night, especially after what I had seen last night? But Grace and her family didn't seem to have any problems. At this point, I realized that maybe they were too used to the strange events in this area, or maybe they had accepted them as a part of their daily lives. I couldn't understand. With each passing moment, the feeling of unease inside me grew stronger, as if a storm was silently approaching. Even though I had no concrete evidence, my intuition told me that something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. But all the while, Grace's family continued to talk, as if it were all just a joke, a harmless coincidence. That vague feeling couldn't comfort me, and I didn't know what to do to convince them of the seriousness of the matter. The lasting haunt. My small apartment, the dim light from the desk lamp reflecting off the blank wall, was filled with nothing but silence. It was Christmas Eve next year, and the cold air outside seemed to penetrate every corner of the room. Yet I sat there, alone, my eyes fixed on the off-TV screen. The only sound around me was the steady ticking of the clock, marking the passage of time. But nothing could fill the silence. Everything, though seemingly normal, my mind could not help but return to the terrible memories of that night. I sat there, my eyes staring into space, but I could not really see anything. My mind was locked in a memory chamber, a place I could not escape, no matter how hard I tried. The sight of the figure standing in the yard, his blurry image in the night, was always present in my mind like an unhealed wound. Every Christmas, the cold winter air reminds me of what happened, of the haunting that I can't let go of. I haven't been back to that house since that day, not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid. Afraid that everything will happen again, afraid that that person will return, And this time, not just an invisible ghost, but a real danger. Even though I try not to think about it, those memories are like inevitable ghosts. They come back at the worst times, when I least expect it. They lurk in my dreams, in every quiet night, and in every cold wind. This Christmas, I can't escape that haunting feeling. Even though I try to fill my mind with work, hobbies, and meaningless conversations, I always feel a strange emptiness in my heart. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, my eyes wide open, staring out the window, hoping that nothing would appear outside. I wondered if that figure had passed through my life, or if I was still haunted by it. Every time I stood in this apartment, I felt a vague fear, as if something was watching me from the darkness outside. And then, on Christmas Eve, when the snow began to fall, I couldn't take my eyes off the window. The white flakes fell, gently and slowly, forming a thin layer on the ground. Everything looked peaceful, but there was a strange feeling that filled the air. The cold outside seemed to accentuate the silence that prevailed. But in that silence, I felt an inexplicable tension. Everything around me seemed intact, but deep down, I knew that something was not over. The light from the street lamps shone through the window, creating long shadows on the white snow. I suddenly saw a figure appear in the dim light. At first I thought I was seeing things, but when I looked more closely, the figure was still standing there, silent, motionless. In the quiet night, my heart pounded again, as if all the old memories came back in just a moment. That shadow, that figure, made me feel the feelings of fear and confusion that I had tried to push out of my mind now rushing back. This time, I couldn't take my eyes off that figure. His blurry figure, standing strangely in the darkness, made me feel like there was some kind of connection between the past and the present. How could a year have passed and I still be haunted by it? How could I escape it when even a peaceful Christmas night like this couldn't give me peace? The figure stood there, motionless, as if observing me from afar. And I, sitting in the quiet room, didn't know what to do.